All right, we are going to start a new unit, believe it or not, after the AP test. Hopefully it went well for you all. I look forward to kind of taking that survey today and just kind of seeing how it went and seeing your scores in July. We are going to do a final project. It's going to involve 2D arrays. I played around with the idea of kind of what to do with these next 2 weeks. And I think to get to this course, 2D arrays are super important. They're way easier to use, a lot more pieces of information. And so to just kind of not do them and avoid them because they aren't on the AP test would do a disservice. So I want to spend today just kind of going through them. This is lesson 19 and lesson 20 in adhesive. So if you want practice and if you want more work with it, go ahead and check those out today as well, because I'll give you the information on your project tomorrow. So first of all, if we just remember what arrays are, they store one type of data. So they're indexed from 0 to length negative 1, and they're used to store large amounts of data. So we could have an array of 0, 1, 2, 3, where, well, let me do something a little better here. All right, so here we have an int array of 20, 11, 32, and 31, where our index values here are 0, 1, 2, and 3. So my length is going to be 4 because there's 4 numbers in it, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 4. So then our array goes from 0 to 4 minus 1, which is 3. There's a quick refresher on arrays. And a 2D array is just, it's literally the same exact thing. It's just displaying it now in a grid. So when we have a table of data that we want to care about. So let's say we have student A, B, C, and D, and they take the 3 tests that we have in a unit. So let's say we have our unit 1 test, we have our unit 2 test, and we have our unit 3 test. So we want to store all their grades in this table. So let's just create their grades real quick. All right, so there's our score. So on the Unit 1 assessment, student A got 100, student B got a 90, student C got an 80, and student D got a 70. And you can see the rest of the table. So the 2D arrays are going to be nice when we want to store a table of information. And actually, all this is an array of arrays. So in the last problem here, right, we had this array of 4 numbers. Well, what we have here is we have an array of 3 numbers here. And then we have a separate array of 3 numbers here. And then another separate array, and then a 4th separate array. And what a 2D array does is just takes all these separate arrays and puts it into one giant array that then can store all of these separate arrays as rows. So the way we create an array is just using our normal command, like you guys have heard me say over and over again, scanner, scan equals new scanner. So then when we're creating this, there's this way here that adhesive uses, but I like to keep it consistent. So remember, scanner right here is our data type. So we're going to be working with an int array, but this time it's going to be a 2D array. So we get 2 sets of square brackets. What do we want to call our int array? They called it grid, so we might as well just call it grid as well. Equals new is our keyword that just says we're creating something. And then scanner, once again, is just the data that we're working with. So it's going to be the int with 2 brackets. But the thing that is picky about an int array is that we need to make sure that we know the size of it. So we have to put in the size of what it's going to be here. Notice that this first number is going to be the row, and that'll be the case all the time. And this number will be the column. So we created a table basically with 4 rows and 3 columns, which is exactly what we have here, right? We have our 4 rows, and then we have our 3 columns for each row. So that would be how I would create and set up a 2D array that looks like that. So once again, you can do either one of these methods. So like that, or like that. So you can put the square brackets before or after the name, but otherwise it's consistent there. In Java, we say it's row major, so the row will always come first. So this is always our row, and this number is always going to be our column. So once again, what Java is doing is it's creating an int array, and it sees the number 8 first. And so it says, oh, we're going to create a table with 8 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we're going to see how many columns we need. Oh, we need 4 columns in each of these rows. So then we create the 4 columns that we need. Just a reminder, when we're doing this, our index values start at 0. So this is actually row 0, row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, because remember this is always length minus 1, which our length is 8, so 8 minus 1 equals 7. And same thing here, this is column 0, 1, 2, and 3. All right, so the same way we accessed different components in the array, we're going to do this using a loop. But this time, since it's a 2D array, it's always going to be a nested for loop. So we're going to have 2 for loops. In Java, we typically use R to represent row and C to represent column. So I know you're used to a for loop being int I equals 0, but because we got 2 of these things, it's going to be R and C. So what it's doing here is if we continue using our table from the last problem, so there's our table from the last problem, it's going to first say, okay, so grid.length is always our how many rows are in this 2D array. So it's going to look up and it's going to say, okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, so my grid.length is going to be 4. So we're going to go through each of those. And then it's going to say, okay, but we're going to start with row 0. So we're going to start with this row right here. And then we're going to say, we're going to nest through all of our columns in that row. So notice our notation here is a little bit different. It now says grid at 0, meaning our grid at row 0 dot length. And then, so what is that going to be? So I look at row 0, and what is my length of row 0? 1, 2, and 3. So it's going to say, so it's going to go through that 3 times. And then that's how we access every single thing in our 2D array. So that's going to system print out grid RC and then a new one. So this exact thing would then, so it'd print R0, C is 0. So it's going to print 0, 0. So it's going to be like, okay, we want row 0, column 0, and it's going to print 100. And then it's going to tab. And it's going to continue this loop right here. So C is then going to go to 1. So we'll now go to column 1 and print 75. C will increase. We will get to row or column 2. It'll print 100. And then now it'll increment C to 3. 3 is not less than 3. So this loop ends, which means that we're then going to run that line of code, system.out.println, which is going to take us now to our new line right here. And then this array, or this loop, will finish its first run. So now that I finished that loop, we increase R, so R is going to be 1, and C is going to go back down to being 0, because we're restarting this loop. This whole loop had ended, and now we're restarting it. So now for row 1, we're going to go back and we're going to do the same thing. So what is our value when C equals 0? So in column 0, we've got a 90. In column 1, we've got an 80. In column 2, we have an 80. Once again, our C loop ends because we're at 3. So it's going to print a new line. It's going to go down here. And then this loop will begin again, but now R is 2 since it's incremented. And so on. And we're going to get to row 2, do all the columns, get to row 3, do all the columns. So that's how we access every single thing in that loop, in that array. Once again, if you're confused by this, go ahead, check out some videos on Adhesive about it, where they'll go through it a little bit slower so that it's more understandable. All right, so if we want to fill a new 2D array, we can do it systematically if we want to. So first of all, we have to create the array. So we'll just make this a small one. All right, so int array, we'll call it R, ARR, equals new int array of 3, 2. So think real quick, what is this table going to look like? How many rows, how many columns is it going to have in it? And hopefully your answer is we have 3 rows with 2 columns. So it's going to look like that. So then if I want to fill it, we are going to have to use our for loop to access it. So we'll start with our first for loop. So for int, we'll start with R, right? Int R equals 0, where R is less than our array.length. And then R++ to increment it. And we want to nest inside this our next for loop. So for int C equals 0, where C is less than, and this time we're doing the column length, not the row length. So it's going to be R at, you can do 0 if you want, that works just fine. Dot length, and then C++. All right, so now you're able to access every single spot in this for loop, and now we want to fill it. So let's just say we have some number we want to start this at. So let's say int num equals 10. So now we can say our array at row column, square bracket, is equal to num, semicolon, and then we can increment num so it changes. And that's all we got to do. And then close our loops. So what this is going to do is it's going to start out with R equals 0, C equals 0. So at 0, 0 in our array, we're going to input num, which is 10. Right, we made it 10 up there. And then we're going to increase num to 11. So num is now 11. And it's going to go through and it's going to fill all of row 0 to start out. So it's going to put in an 11 right there. And then the column, the nested loop will end right here. So then we're going to go into row 1, which would then make this 12, this 13, this 14, and this 15. So it's just going to increment it by one number each time. All right, here if we want to access a value in our 2D array, it's actually pretty easy to do, and it's almost exactly like a regular array. We just say what the value is. So let's say I want to create a method that's going to return a value in our array. So we're going to say this is public. Since we've been using this int array, let's just keep it up. Int, we're going to return an int, and we're going to say, I'm going to call this getNum. Our parameters will be our row, so let's say int row and int column. So then what it's going to say is it's going to say we want to take our array that we just made. I'll use this array right here that we just created. So public int getNum, int row, comma int column. So array at the row that they give us and column they give us. And then we just want to return that. And that's it. So for example, if they give us the, if somebody calls this method getNum 2, 1, the value, what would be the value that's returned there? I'll ask that question. So 2, 1. If they say 2 comma 1, what's going to be our value that is returned? And the answer to this is 14, right? Because it's going to be row 2. So 0, 1, 2, and then 0, 1. So I apologize. It's going to be 15. 15. So what this really does is it says array at 2, 1 equals 15. So this way we can take our row number and our column number. We literally just put it into our array, and then what's the row and column, and what that value is, and that value is going to be 15. All right, if we want to check if two values are equal, we kind of do the same call that we just did. So we can set up an if statement here. So if array at, I don't know, let's do 0, 0. At 0, 0, and since these are ints, we can just use our double equal sign. So if our number at 0, 0 is equal to our array at 0, 1, then do something. And then close it. So what this is doing is it's checking, hey, is array at 0, 0, which back in here, 0, 0 would be the number 10. So it's saying, is 10 equal to 0, 1, which when I come back here, 0, 1 would be still row 0, but now we have column 1, which would be 11. So is 10 equal to 11? Okay, and then we would obviously do something if it is, or if it's not, then we don't do something. So that's just checking to see if two values are equal. And last but not least, this is pretty easy as well. We want to change a value in a 2D array. So for example, if I wanted to take a look at my table and I said, oh, this number is 13, I want that to be 0. So we're just going to take our row and column. So this would be array at row 1, column 1. So my array at 1, 1. And we're just going to give it a new value. So equals 0. And we're just assigning it a new value and saying, hey, it's now 0. And that'll change that to 0. So that's very easy as far as that goes. Okay, and that's it. Once again, a very quick tutorial of 2D arrays. They function exactly like normal arrays. It's just now they have a second dimension to it, right? They have instead of just a width of numbers, they have now a length and width of numbers as well. If you have any other questions on 2D arrays, don't know what to do, make sure you watch the videos on adhesive. Once again, it's term 2, lesson 19 and 20. But essentially, the stuff that we went over here today are going to be the information on 2D arrays that you'll need for the project starting tomorrow.